Good morning to everyone, namaskaram. This is that kind of time that whatever you say will get judged in an extreme way. Well, there are good reasons for that for a whole lot of people. There are lots of dead bodies and lots of bereaved families. So there is emotion, strong emotions. But there are problems and there are solutions. When we invest in problems, problems multiply. It would be wise to invest in solutions. But in a democratic nation, when you take everybody's opinions and emotions and considerations, it's very difficult to move in any one direction because it's always trying to move in 10 different directions. But I feel this wouldn't be a very difficult problem to solve if there is an abstinence from daily violence that's unleashed in the form of terror. The old philosophy of 1,000 cuts is still being executed. When that's going on, it becomes very difficult to even talk about a solution. I think that's where we are right now. Aspiring for peace is definitely in everybody's heart. Aspiring for peace looks like a noble endeavor. But practical situations have always been handled in different ways. It's not just today's issue, forever human conflicts have been happening. Because when somebody is aspiring for peace, somebody else takes advantage with one incisive, violent act. I think between the two nations, enough of those things have happened. Question of trusting each other just doesn't arise right now. So if you ask me, because when it comes to common people, their aspirations of economic well-being is one of the important things. As a region, we have 33% of the world's malnourished. So, the largest number of stunted children in the region, in the world, is in that region. So individual people and families, if you take them, their aspiration will be very economic. I feel putting economics as a front foot is the best way to do it. I think India made a serious effort in giving this most favored nation status to our western neighbor, but that did not yield any result as such. Today, it's sort of been withdrawn by putting 200%, whatever you call it, a cess or a tax or whatever it is. So, talking peace is a very fashionable thing. Everybody talks about it. But when it is being declared by the proponents of this violence very clearly, our goals are not geographic. That is, Kashmir is not the goal. Once we liberate Kashmir, we will liberate the rest of India. When these things have been clearly stated, I don't see how you can talk with the same people endlessly peace because it's ridiculous. So I feel the region has to make efforts to bring an economic prosperity. I think if the rest of the countries show economic prosperity, I'm sure people in Pakistan don't aspire for anything else, they also aspire for their well-being. It is just that certain forces in every nation behave like they represent every human being in that country, but it is not true. You should see the bonhomie that Indians and Pakistanis have outside the country. When they're outside that region, they do very well with each other. Once they are there, not possible.
Namaskar, Guruji. You hit the point very hard when you said that there's been so much senseless violence of late, and I think on behalf of all the participants here, we again once more pay our condolences to the grieving family and to a grieving nation. But my question is more fundamental. You understand soul better than all of us. What is it in the human soul that drives us to this violence, senseless I must say, and then derive pleasure out of it? Because unless, like you said, there's pleasure, we don't like to do anything. You talked about the joys and happiness that you brought with your games in the village, but what is lacking in our souls that we get pleasure out of violence?
Well, I would like you to take away the senseless, because those are words of poetry. But violence makes sense to somebody. That's why they cause violence, because it makes sense to fulfill certain goals of their own. So let's not be in that kind of a utopian mindset that violence is senseless. No, there is sense to it, a very cruel sense to it, but there is sense to it because a whole lot of things historically have been achieved with violence. So people know if you are capable of unleashing a certain level of violence, you will achieve your goals. So it is not senseless. Only for somebody who's looking at only the blood and gore and not seeing the design behind it, it is not violence by default, it's not like crime. This is violence with design, driving towards a certain point, and if we do not stop it or if we do not counter it appropriately, their designs will be fulfilled. So it is not senseless, it is sense, but unfortunately, it's senseless for the lives. About your soul, we need to understand this. Once we identify with something, whatever is our identity, of caste, creed, religion, nationality, once we identify ourselves with something, the very nature of human identity is such that we will start working for that identity. That identity becomes more significant than life at some point. We're willing to live for it, we're willing to die for it. It may be a family, it may be a nation, or it may be a religion or a race, but once you identify with something, that's how human mind works. To create a world beyond these identities, well, that's the ideal, that's what we all strive for. But is that reality close by? No. I'm not somebody who lives in a dream state. I live in this world, I know the realities of this world. Are we anywhere close to that? No, we are not. But today that possibility of taking ourselves in the direction of beyond identity kind of world, beyond limited identity kind of world is much more a possibility than ever before because technology has made the borders of the nation, the borders that you set forth in so many different ways of societies is kind of broken and it's become very porous. Young people are communicating with each other, it doesn't matter there is war or peace, they are communicating with each other. So there is a much bigger possibility today of taking the world towards a humanity which identifies as humanity, not with race, religion, nation, whatever else. But right now the reality is, nation is the largest segment of humanity we can address for solving any problems. We are still not in that kind of state where we can address the entire globe. We have not come to that state where we will embrace each other and live in absolute joy or peace. That is not anywhere close. So nation is the largest piece of humanity we can address, so that identity is probably better than other identities within the nation. So in that context, national boundaries should have been settled, especially when we got our independence. we should have settled our national boundaries one way or the other. Little give and take somewhere and we should have done it whichever way. But we have not done that, we are still living with a LOC or line of control, which is all the time out of control. So, fundamentals of making a nation, there are many aspects to a nation. One basic piece of it is sovereignty of the nation. That means we know where our nation begins or where it ends. When that is in constant confusion, then these fights become inevitable, unfortunately. I think it is time, one way or the other, we must settle as to what is our nation, what is not our nation. If we don't settle this, we will bleed generations to come.